If you're new to endurance sports, you may have never gone through the process of doing what's called a taper. The taper comes at the end of your training program, and today I'm going to talk about 5 mistakes that amateur or new endurance athletes make when it comes to incorporating the taper into their training plans. My name's Buck. I'm a certified strength and conditioning specialist, personal trainer, and running coach. And in today's video, we're going to do a high-level look at some of the most common mistakes people make when it comes to the taper, as well as what you can do to avoid making those mistakes yourself. All right, let's dive in, starting with mistake number 1. Doing too little. If you've never heard the term taper before, what we're talking about is a period of time, usually 2 weeks, maybe up to 4 weeks, depending on the person and the sport, where we reduce the training intensity and or volume to allow the athlete to recover from their training program that they've completed prior to their event, which for example could be like a marathon or an Ironman or any kind of race when it comes to endurance sports. And the number one mistake amateurs tend to make during this period of time called the taper is doing too little. A taper is a reduction in work. It's not the time to completely stop work altogether. Many people think the taper is time to stop exercising completely, and this couldn't be further from the truth. During the taper, the goal is to decrease volume and intensity, allowing the body to maximize the adaptations the athlete produced during the training cycle. In strength and conditioning, we call this peaking. If we were to put a year-long training plan on a graph, it would look something like this. In this example, we are preparing an athlete for a marathon, and we start with high volume, low intensity, and gradually work our way to lower volume, higher intensity as the program goes on. Keep in mind, this is just one way to periodize a training program. There's plenty of other options out there. They all work towards that same goal of peaking on race day. As you can see, we're ramping up this intensity line slowly to produce performance adaptations along the way. Then when we reach the last month of training, where we've increased intensity as far as we can without getting into that high risk injury or overtraining territory. Now it's time to allow the body to recover while keeping it prepared for the big event. And we do this with the taper. And as you can see in this period right here, both the intensity and the volume come down. We're allowing the athlete to recover without being detrained. This is when the athlete starts losing the conditioning that they built up during the training program. The key takeaway here is don't do too little during the taper. All right, let's look at mistake number 2. The second mistake athletes make during the taper is the opposite of what we just discussed, and it's doing too much. Chances are you're not Christian Blumenfeld, and you can't get away with doing a full Ironman 2 days before the Ironman World Championship. Of course, there are athletic phenoms like Blumenfeld who can get away with this type of training, but they are still considered the exception and not the rule. All that to say, don't increase volume and intensity all the way up to race day. Many amateur endurance athletes, especially those who don't follow a training program, make this mistake because they do not believe that they've actually done enough to prepare for the event. But endurance events aren't like high school exams. You can't cram the week before and expect to pass. If you do too much during your taper, you risk showing up to the starting line feeling exhausted and flat during your race. We have to remember this taper period is a time to recover without becoming detrained, which means you can't do too little, but you also can't do too much. And that's why it's important to have a really strong training program. If this is all getting a little confusing, I do want to take a second to say all of my endurance programs are designed with a taper that balances the volume and intensity based on the individual. And whether you work with me or another coach or try to figure this all out on your own, it's really important to take the time when you're putting your training plan together to make those adjustments so that when you come to the taper, you're tapering based off of the work you did throughout the plan. And that's where it can get a little confusing. And it really does benefit you to work with a coach if you're trying to get to that next level athletically. All right, let's jump into the third mistake people tend to make when it comes to the taper. And the third mistake is experimenting. This typically occurs with gear and nutrition. The gear one makes sense to me. For example, people want to wear a new pair of shoes for a race, but they forget it can take a lot of miles to really break in a new pair of shoes. So get yourself that new pair of race shoes that you want, but start running in them 4 to 8 weeks out from your actual race. Don't try to break them in during your taper or, God forbid, on race day. And when it comes to nutrition, we tend to want to save our best nutrition for race day because honestly, it's kind of expensive, but your body may not respond well to some new fuel source that you've just introduced. And you can't complete a successful taper if you're stuck in the bathroom. So the key here is just experiment at the beginning of your training program with new things like nutrition or gear. That way you have time to make those adjustments along the way. The fourth mistake athletes make during the taper is eating everything they can get their hands on because they are carbo loading. It's a good idea to increase your carbohydrate consumption during the taper. It's a bad idea to use the taper to gorge on junk food for 2 weeks straight. Athletes who make this mistake tend to show up to the starting line feeling very sluggish. Remember, the goal of the taper, the goal of carbo loading is to feel replenished and not weighed down. Be smart with the type of food you're putting into your body during the taper. Just like we talked about with experimenting with nutrition and gear, you also don't want to use this time to really deviate from how you've been eating throughout the training program. You just want to increase the carbohydrate intake to help replenish your glycogen stores. The last mistake I want to mention that athletes tend to make during the taper is panicking. And they panic specifically about their training programs. It's natural to feel like you haven't done enough prep. Most amateurs think this way because their training took random hits from life. You start recalling every missed workout because you had to work or your kid was sick. But at this point, if you're in the taper and you're spending all this time worrying, it's going to just exhaust you. Remember that endurance is cumulative and you may have not gotten every workout you wanted, but you still put in the work, you still improved, and you're still going to show up to the start line. So if you're spending all this time worrying, it's actually going to create more exhaustion and potentially affect your sleep, your mental health, all the things that you need to be in line so that you do well on race day. And look, if you have a bad showing, you can do a race debrief afterwards and identify the problem areas and then make adjustments the next time. But there's no point in dwelling now. It's only going to make things harder for you when you get to the starting line. And that's it for this video. If there's any other strength and conditioning topics that you want me to dive into, please make sure to leave them in the comments. I'm happy to make more videos on whatever topic you're interested in. I do want to mention that I have pre-made training programs available on Training Peaks. Right now I have programs for trail racing and obstacle course racing, but I will have more programs in the future for road races, cycling, and general strength and conditioning. So make sure to check that regularly. And the link is in the description below. I also provide 2 levels of coaching depending on the support that you are interested in. Feel free to check out my coaching page in the description and let me know if you're interested in working with me so we can put together a training program that has a very precise taper to you and the race that you want to complete. And the last thing I wanted to mention is if you are new to strength training for endurance sports, I've put together a free 7-day intro to kettlebell course for runners. I put a ton of work in this, so if you're looking for a great free resource on how to incorporate kettlebell training into your overall training program, definitely check this out. It's in the description below. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.